Hi, and welcome to CSO Connected. I'm Tamara McMillan, and today we're going to explore the topic of talent and recruitment. Finding great talent is really hard, and keeping them is perhaps even harder, particularly in today's economy. Harvard Business Review estimated in 2017 that in sales, an average of 27% was the turnover. And in that same year, LinkedIn's study revealed that that number might be as high as 35%. Obviously, losing great people is not only difficult to our revenue stream, but it makes operating the business with continuity really difficult. So today we're going to speak to somebody who is an expert in this area. I'd like you to welcome with me Gerry Hill. He's the Chief Revenue Officer of Eva.ai. So Gerry, tell us a little bit about yourself and about Eva.ai.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm the Chief Revenue Officer at Eva.ai. We're an automation and cognitive technology company that works with senior leadership and executives in HR suites in enterprise to automate the top of the recruitment funnel and ultimately eliminate a lot of wasteful tasks that are associated with the tool administration and administrative processes that go alongside recruiting at scale.
Okay. I want to come back to the automating the top of the funnel because I think that was really interesting. But you're a special guy besides your professional current career. Rumor has it that you played rugby for about 15 years professionally and semi-professionally. Is that rumor true?
Yeah, it's true. I mean, I was just a big lump that happened to be quite sort of aggressive and rambunctious. And, you know, when you're blessed with that sort of genetic profile, you get picked up by rugby clubs at a young age. It was a remarkable experience. I got to sort of travel a lot. I got to meet interesting and very, very compelling people. And you know, I got a lot of lateral learning from it that I think I've been able to carry forward into my commercial career. So it was really compelling.
I can only imagine how special that time in your life has been. As a lump then, who was your most interesting or perhaps most memorable person that you met that maybe left an imprint on you?
I mean, there have been quite a lot. I think the most sort of compelling guy was a guy called Russell Earnshaw who basically is now in charge of sort of developing England's under-20s and under-18s.
Oh, wow.
But a very dynamic, thoughtful person, super creative, didn't really drive things through a playbook.
Okay.
It was very much, you know, what's the requirement? How do we do this better? And he got us as players to think about it rather than just sort of use traditional and conventional coaching methods, which at the time was quite revolutionary. And it's quite a brutal environment as well. I think when I moved into business from rugby, the transition was quite hard. And it was hard because, you know, whilst rugby teaches you a lot of innate stuff, it actually doesn't allow you to develop as a human being when you're in a professional sports environment. You have people telling you what to wear, where to be, what to eat, what to do with about 80% of your day. So the ability to sort of think for yourself is something that gets a bit lost. I think the other thing that I found about working in business straight out of rugby was the lack of accountability and honesty in enterprise versus the environment that we came from in that rugby environment. It was brutal, it was peer-led. You know, if you messed up, people told you every single day. So you had to be accountable to that. You can't get away with some of that stuff in the work environment. HR gets involved. And I think that was sort of quite an interesting conditioning effect. So if there's one thing that I'm still missing or chasing in my life is that sort of radical candor environment where, you know, you can be completely and brutally honest with people about performance. And, you know, you end up chasing that still.
I think that type of transparency, particularly in leadership, and that authenticity is something that we do see in some of the greatest leaders out there, but it is quite difficult to achieve in a corporate environment. But I have to believe that if we keep going with it, that'll happen. And you also, when you were speaking there, you talked about, I think, an example of leading from the front, which is not just telling you how to do it, but showing you and coming alongside. You also mentioned some things that were challenging in that transition into business. But I imagine being a professional athlete, of course, it takes so much discipline, commitment, really working, you know, no matter what the pain is at times. What were those positive attributes or skills that have helped you as you've come into business and particularly in sales?
I think it's endeavour, right? More than anything, it's endeavour. Knowing that if you've got a goal, you can find ways to achieve it through hard work. You know, you don't get opportunities to perform at a high level at many things in life, but the one thing that gets you there is knowing that you can put in extra work, do more, lift more, eat better, sleep harder, right? And if you can sort of transition with that mindset into your professional life, then I think you're going to equip yourself. And if we put that acutely into the lens of a sales job, you know, most people start in an inside sales job or an SDR job somewhere. If you're the last person in making that last call, then you're giving yourself the best chance of success. And, you know, I don't think that you can sort of necessarily learn that in a university environment or a school environment. It's either something that you want to do or not do to build a better life for yourself.
So finding talent, as I mentioned a bit earlier, is hard. It's hard to find great talent. It's really hard to retain them. And when we go about finding talent, we usually look either for performers, people that are going to come in and do what they've done before, be the rainmakers in sales, or we hopefully want to retain them. And I think it's often looked at as an either or. And what's your approach to whether we should be focused on hiring performers or hiring talent that we can retain?
Yeah, I mean, I think firstly, talent's an overused word. Right, fundamentally. To be talented puts you in the top 1%. To be skilled puts you in the sort of next 2 to 20%. So talent's probably something we need to revisit. I think secondly, a lot of people don't understand what they're recruiting for, specifically into a sales function. Each component of a sales job is uniquely different, but if you treat it all as the same, then you're never going to get the same outputs that you're anticipating or expecting. And then lastly, too many people don't emphasize retention as their number one reason to recruit. The business pain, the lost continuity, the cost of losing potential consistent performance is brutal to most organisations. Now, certain types of company can tolerate that because of their existing market presence, their size of their P&L and their revenue costs, etc. But for the majority of companies, which are fundamentally SMEs, that's brutal.
Yeah.
If you've got people on a consistent cycle of churn. So we really believe deeply that your mindset should be to recruit for people that are going to execute against the requirement of the specific job that you're hiring against. And will they add value and be consistent through their entire life cycle of performance? And trying to find a way to predict that is really tough, because the conventional wisdom says you do one of three things. You hire a recruiter, you either go to market yourself, or thirdly, you sort of speak to networks in order to find access to those people. And all three of those sort of propositions are flawed, fundamentally. Recruiters, because they're incentivized around a commission basis, which ultimately skews or distorts the value of the candidate that you're potentially meeting. Secondly, they don't want to work inside of that process that you might want to work inside, because it diminishes their commercial value to you. By going directly to market, well, guess what? You're not an expert. It's not your day job. You know, whilst you should be recruiting all the time, you're not actually an expert at recruiting. And then thirdly, it's, you know, your network's probably going to give you some awesome juice to go out and recruit against, but, you know, whether or not those people are going to be empowered in your environment with your proposition, your marketplace, and all of the other things that make people successful in sales is a huge unknown quantity.
Yeah, well, I think it's interesting. It's like a vicious cycle. Often we use job descriptions that are outdated or don't really ask for what our business needs or what we really want. We then have people interviewed by people whose day job is not interviewing or assessing skills, and so we tend to either hire somebody that looks and smells like us, or we think we could be friends with, you know, and they seem to have what it takes to get the job done. And then the onboarding piece, I think, is where many companies fail. And I know I've had conversations with my leaders and said, you know, we seem to have a turnstile of people coming in and out of the door. How is it that the most qualified and talented person on the day we offer them the job became the worst person on your team? And so what do you advise to tackle some of those challenges around how we're writing those job descriptions, how we're bringing people in and engaging them in the interview process, and then, you know, why aren't we onboarding them well?
Yeah, so we've plagiarised and adapted Mark Roberge's model that he used at HubSpot, which is a quantifiable measure of 23 sales characteristics. His version was 17, I believe, but we've extended it out to include 23 things. And they include things like likability or, you know, intelligence, and we can test and assess those through an interview process in a qualitative and a quantitative way. Each one of those is weighted to the specific requirement of a job. So if I'm hiring for SDRs, I don't really care about their likability particularly as a leading indicator of their success. I just need to know that they're going to get on the phone 100 times a day and they're going to book me 2 meetings. So their likability is immaterial to their job success, but their persistence and their other value drivers are more material. If I'm hiring an enterprise account executive, though, that likability piece and their intellect and their raw ability to stitch together complex environments is absolutely quintessential to their success. So we measure an index for that. But by going through that exercise, it gives you 3 or 4 different work streams, right? If you know what you want and you're able to quantify it and weight it against the requirement of that job, just by something as simple as that framework, it then enables you to write a really probing and well-crafted job description that speaks to the market of people that you're trying to hire. We've actually seen some really weird results from that, though. One is just sheer volume of people that actually applied to the job.
Okay.
Because you're not dressing yourself up as the sexiest or the best, because you're speaking to the actual brutal, honest truth of what that person will have to do. So instead of getting 50 inbound applicants through LinkedIn a week, you might only get 5. But that self-selection in and of itself is a really, really good leading indicator about whether or not the people that are applying to even participate are going to be contributing value to the company. So I'd rather have less of higher quality people who've actually read the honest description of what they'll be doing over and above somebody that's taken a templated approach to a generic sales job and then added a few little twists and turns about your company's missions and values. That's not a solid exercise. And on the JD point, you know, LinkedIn basically ran some analysis where they suggested that 80% of all job descriptions for sales and marketing jobs across all value chains and segments are fundamentally the same, which means that there's just this consistent cookie cutter of job descriptions that's doing the rounds because people are too lazy to invest the time, effort and energy to actually build the... I see job descriptions as a scope of work, right? You're writing a scope of work that will allow you to select somebody to be the person that you need to deliver that thing.
There's so much goodness in what you just said. I want to unpack that with a few extra questions.
Right, go for it.
All right, so one is, when you hire someone for a specific role with this better, realistic, here's what you're going to do day to day. So perhaps, you know, their personality or relationship skills isn't the most important thing. It's what kind of phone hound they are. Yeah. How does that impact your ability, though, to take employees on a career progression? If you are hiring them for a more isolated skill set, does it allow them to grow in the organization? Where do you kind of cover that off?
I think we do try to sort of understand what people's desires are through a sort of longer cycle, and we've actually done some radically different work recently where we don't speak to people about their annual target anymore. And we make this something that we're very clear about at the very top of the recruitment process. This is even before they've been onboarded. We'll facilitate meetings with people to speak to financial advisors and planners so that we can actually get a better understanding of what their actual life objectives are. Because if we know that we're going to be able to retain people better, because we're actually holding people to account for the thing that they're there for. Right. Which is for themselves to build a better life, especially if you're in a highly commissioned environment. But me holding them to account on my target for them, often their target for themselves is so much greater, but most people just don't know that. So if we can see that type of relationship in at the outset in the recruitment process, then you understand what people's sort of DNA and composition is. Yeah. And we struggled a bit with millennials recently because, you know, their money appetite just doesn't seem to be as consistent as perhaps our generation. I think the other thing that, you know...
Do you think that's because they've grown up slightly more affluent?
I'm not going to sort of be able to qualify that, I don't think. There's a lot of sort of societal stuff around it as well. I think there's sort of impact and meaning. Okay. You know, what we kind of do at Eva with our mission is we're trying to connect the world with meaningful work. Nice. Yeah, but it's also a bit trivial, if I'm honest. But it's definitely a part of our employee value proposition that's also consistent with our go-to-market. And I think that's something that a lot of companies don't do particularly well. They don't treat their recruitment as a separate value proposition in the context of their wider go-to-market. So if you can be consistent with your go-to-market through that initial outreach to your recruitment efforts, then I think people have got a very, very consistent perspective of who you are and what you're about. And that, for us, in a youth-based SDR entry-level kind of world right now is sort of giving us capital, and you know we're able to capitalise on that, which I'm quite pleased about.
You talked about also that you may at times find that you have fewer applicants to a job, but you get the right applicants, which is all anybody really wants because it takes a lot of time to screen people. Have you found a hot topic, of course, today is diversity and trying to hire a balance of different types of individuals from different types of backgrounds. Do you find that when you write those more realistic job descriptions, are you achieving that diversity by the very nature of that greater transparency, or is it too early to tell and we don't have that kind of information?
I don't think we do a good enough job of tracking it. I'm a bit old school, if I'm honest. I believe that in meritocratic recruitment, and I don't believe in over-indexing anything just to skew the odds in favour of a policy. My best performers are young females, by a long way. And I don't know why that is. I've not tried to quantify it or measure it. We seem to attract a lot more sort of female participation in our recruitment process. And I wonder if it's quite often because of the marketplace that we sell into. We don't do a particularly good job, and I don't think any startup in London does a particularly good job of looking outside of their intellectual bubbles. One of the things that I've eliminated is a requirement for a degree. I just don't think it's absolutely relevant at all anymore. We are going to be doing quite a lot of hiring in February, and I'm going to sort of try and make that process blind so that we take names and education out of people's resumes and make them completely irrelevant. And I was inspired to do that by a good friend of mine, John Lake, who's the head of demand generation for Europe for Eventbrite, and they had some real successes with that recently.
And I guess that's really what I was getting at, is more there's information that suggests that just the very way that job descriptions are written, sometimes even the salary lines, that certain types of people, not just a male-female thing, but various different types of people from different walks of life may not submit themselves. To your point, I think a degree is perfect, and you may be screening out the best candidate in the pool. So it's great to hear that the technology is going to help us as employers do that a bit better. So what about psychometric testing and these sorts of evaluations? What's your take on the validity of those? You did talk about doing some assessments on individuals, but do they work?
I think in the right approach, and if you can interpret the data well, then they're very valuable. But most people aren't qualified to interpret the data significantly well enough to make the right decisions. And they're often used at completely the wrong part of the recruitment process. We've seen a lot of people that are so convicted in their belief as their candidate to you that they're going to sell themselves like an elite salesperson should. If you do the psychometric at the end of the process, then you've already built up a record of self-limiting beliefs about that person, right? So you and I could meet for the first time in an interview. You could absolutely rock my world, and I will then go into the organisation and tell everybody about how incredible you were.
Yeah.
And then, if it comes down to 3 candidates and we decide to put you through psychometrics as the last point of difference, then because we like you already, we're going to hire you regardless of what the psychometric tells us. So when we use psychometrics at Eva, and when I've used psychometrics in the past, I've always put it as the initial screening post. So a quick phone call, validate interest, then psychometric, without the relationship being built. Use the data as the leading indicator, and then narrow your funnel completely on that basis, and then you can start to do the human-to-human stuff afterwards. But you've eliminated the sort of weak behaviours or the weak components of performance that you're anticipating at the earliest part of the process rather than at the end. Because that recruitment process costs a lot of time and money.
Yeah.
Right?
It does.
So if you're going to make the investment into a test, put it in the right part of the process, I think is the first thing. I think the second point on psychometrics that I'm very passionate about is nobody really understands behavioural science well enough to articulate the value that they drive for the organisation. And they can be used as an amazing coaching tool for candidates, but candidates never ever get to see the output. How many times have people run assessment centres and been qualified out but never actually seen the data to tell them why?
Yeah.
And I think part of that's because people aren't qualified to show them the data and explain to them why it mattered in that context. So you're kind of becoming a weak proposition if you can't actually be candid and give the person the insights into why they underperformed on the test. I broadly believe in the science of human performance, though. So whilst a lot of what I'm saying is contradictory, there is a place for them if you've got the capacity to use them well.
Well, I mean, because I think it is all about a balance of different types of inputs about an individual, because I think it could equally be difficult to put psychometric testing or some sort of evaluation at the beginning And you may have individuals who are incredibly nervous, haven't done one in a very long time, and may not show well, but there may be other aspects of their candidacy that say, well, we should continue the conversation. So I would imagine you'd agree that it's around having some intervention, human intervention in that.
But here's where I really struggle. Like Myers-Briggs is still the most common personality process that most people have to undergo in an evaluation, right? It's situational test. You have to take it at least 10 times in order for it to give an accurate result. So if you're asking people to go through it once, then you're never getting the truth. And you're never actually getting into core sales performance characteristics, because all it is a very sort of skin-deep cellular view of what somebody's going to be like as a human, not whether or not they're going to perform. So if you're going to use them, they need to have a predictive component somewhere.
Yeah.
And then as a leader, because most hiring managers never really see the output, it seems to be like a guardian of the HR function, locked up in a sort of birdcage. And if the leader can't use that insight to better inform their onboarding and coaching of that unique individual, then it's been a completely wasted exercise for everybody involved.
It definitely is a loss of investment, because I know I've certainly taken loads of those tests and evaluations, and a couple different things happen from the candidate point of view. One, it's always interesting, the more you take them, you certainly find commonalities about yourself, which is good, I think. But also the disappointment when you are on board and they never get used, because it was going to help with your further development, and you think, wow, I put a lot of time, they put a lot of time.
It's a magnifying glass that gives you a rare opportunity to actually get inside of somebody. Salespeople are exuberant and extrovert by nature, but at the same time they're quite guarded, and the best ones are generally quite guarded and a little protective of themselves at the same time. So if you're going to put somebody through that and you want to become a better coach, then that's one of your best data anchors that you can ever have to continually help people to perform.
I think also because salespeople are performers, right? Yeah. They're essentially on a stage, so they're very good at showing you what they want you to see, but those tests sort of get under the skin a bit.
Every forecasting call, right?
Exactly. It's coming in, I promise.
Honestly, it's happening.
You talked about helping with the top of the funnel. What did you mean when you referenced the top of the funnel? Is that?
Yeah, the top of the funnel is essentially where most of the sort of work is. It's attraction. Well, it's an old Eva.ai advertising funnel: attraction, interest, demand, awareness, right? And recruitment processes are fundamentally a sales and marketing exercise. So if you can strip out a lot of the sort of psychobabble around recruitment, then you can actually understand that there's an acute symmetry with how we would run a sales and marketing funnel and a sales and marketing process. And where do most people invest a lot of their time, effort and energy in sales and marketing? It's at the top of the funnel, in the hope that you can capture broad interest from your ideal customer profile. In the recruitment context, ICP stands for ideal candidate profile. So what we're trying to do is just expand the top of the funnel so that you're able to measure for the first time, because recruitment functions broadly are not particularly data driven. And then secondly, you're able to capture sort of broad insights and engage candidates in the way that you or I might do through a nurturing sequence through sales loft or outreach. So that's an automation play for recruiters.
Yeah.
And that's where the most sort of time is wasted. Just things like reading CVs or matching or screening, or, if you can find little productivity accelerators throughout that entire workflow, then you can compete and build better businesses, which is essentially the function of talent acquisition or recruiters more broadly, right?
Yeah. So when it comes to success, I think I know probably what you'll say, but mindset. Mindset is certainly a big topic. Do you have a growth mindset or not is a big topic. There's a great story, a shipping story from the 1800s that I'm not going to remember the name of the gentleman, but put an ad in the paper and basically it said, looking for, 100 men who are willing to risk life and limb. It won't be fun, it won't be pretty, not sure you're even going to live, but if we make it, we'll have great rewards. And all the people that showed up, they all survived because they knew what they were in for, didn't they? So what role is mindset playing, and how, through whether it's psychometric testing or whatever, how can you kind of get at the heart of that resilience and growth mindset?
Yeah, growth mindset's an interesting concept. It's the idea that people want to get better all of the time. It overlaps beautifully with a sales and marketing team or a go-to-market team or a commercial function for a number of reasons, but I wouldn't over-index it particularly. The reason I wouldn't over-index it particularly is you don't necessarily want everybody in your organisation to have one. You want the right people to have one.
Yeah.
And those, again, then comes back to who are your 1%ers, 2%ers, and your A's and your B's and your C's, which is something we're trying to get rid of, by the way. But I think mindset for me is, do you turn up to work every day enthusiastic? Do you feel like you're going to add value to yourself and your customers? Do you feel like you're going to move the dial on something? That's a really good example of a very basic growth mindset. And if you're a junior entry-level salesperson, that's probably the extent of all you need initially. And then those wins, that's what helps you to inspire further growth in your career. If you can create that culture where people feel empowered and where they know that they can come in and do great work, then that's good. But resilience and toughness for me is probably the #1 desire trait or characteristic that I ever try and measure for. Fundamentally because sales is a perverse job. It really is a perverse job. The losses, no matter how good you are, always outweigh the wins in terms of that ratio of no to yes. The quality of deals can be a bit inconsistent at times, you know, and that's the nature of being in a targeted environment. You're going to do deals. Some of them might not be the right deals, and you've got to live with that. And I think thirdly, it's just the complete overbearing pressure that a lot of people find themselves under. So if you're tough, if you've got a chip on your shoulder, and if you're a bit resilient and you want to be a street fighter, then sales is for you. But if you're not, then it isn't. Yeah. And we try to codify that. We've got a research project called Resilify that we're building out with a brilliant guy called Dr. Doug sorry, his Polish surname's very long and I can't pronounce it ever.
I won't tell.
But he's been doing some foundational research around the behaviours that demonstrate what mental toughness is or isn't. And it's really simple. It's 4 C's. It's confidence, challenge, commitment and control. And each one of those has got an outer order and an inner order, right? So it's something that's internal, but something that you also demonstrate to the world. So something like confidence. Am I confident in myself? That can be measured. Am I confident in my ability to tell stories to total strangers? Right? So that for me is a brilliant way of just very basically looking at the construct of, are you tough? You know, and I just love hiring people who are street fighters. I like hiring people that come from slightly unconventional routes. I like people that have got a point to prove. I like people that have got scraps to have. You know, I gave a talk last year called My £1 Million Mistake. And the first time I ever hired as a head of sales, enterprise account executives. And on paper, the 2 people I hired were just amazing, right? One was an ex-Goldman Sachs banker, went into major enterprise software, just gilded, handsome dude. Like, honestly, everything about him was like the Brad Pitt of sales. But coming into our environment at that time as a plucky startup with no pre-sales, no marketing support, nobody to carry his bags on business trips, he failed miserably because he'd never, ever in his entire life had to roll up his sleeves and actually dig deep. And the cost of getting that wrong was about £500,000 in lost productivity, the cost of reputational risk because we didn't carry the deals, the competitive swing in the buying cycle over a 12 quarterly period. They were material mistakes that were made. Yeah. And we were responsible for that because we were so overwhelmed by the quality of his CV that we weren't able to dig into his substance. And I sort of vowed to myself, I'm never going to make that mistake again, which is what triggered me to go on this journey to learn more and more about these performance criteria. And how do you actually find the scrappy people that are going to just dig deep for themselves and for you? You know, they're the people that are ultimately going to be successful in my environment.
Yeah, it's so interesting because I think the reality is sales is a place that's full of change. And certainly if you're in technology, the products themselves are constantly changing, the marketplace is changing. So to have people that can't stomach that very well means the job will be unduly stressful for them and the likelihood of them succeeding is not very great, which is unpleasant for everyone and can have a knock-on effect. When you talked about hiring the superstar, I think all of us have probably fallen to that, someone looking great on paper. But part of that, I imagine, is the environment that you're bringing a person into to be successful and whether or not it's prepared for you. So I'll have discussions with organizations that say, oh, we really want to hire a person who comes from outside of the industry. But you'll find that often those people fail because whilst intellectually the organization wanted different thinking, practically, culturally, they weren't ready to accept different types of thinking, or, you know, someone with that level of skill set who was used to having more available from a resource perspective doesn't know how to function without resource. So finding that culture fit is also, I think, quite difficult. Is that something that you find people struggle with, and are you able to help with that in the interview screening?
To a point. I think if we make a commitment to anybody that comes into our organisations, regardless of which stream or which vertical or where else they come from, if we know that we can endeavour to give them the best onboarding experience and all the relevant tools that are going to give them success throughout their life cycle of their employment with us, then that for me is good culture. And we love that different perspectives component. And why it matters to us, it isn't about bringing in awesome people from outside of industry to give us different perspectives. It's about what do we have the right to recruit, because we're a young startup, right? We don't have massive budgets to compete with similar types of companies like SAP. You know, my account executive budget's probably about £50,000 on salary. You know, SAP for an enterprise account executive, you'll be lucky if you're getting away with 120,000 on basic before you've even started topping up their comps and everything else around their job. But I still know that I need awesome people, right? So for me, all of these processes are designed to invest to make sure that we find those little money balls somewhere in the marketplace that's over frothy, by the way. Like, in 20 years of doing this, I've never been in such a frothy marketplace for sales resource. You know, it's just remarkable how many jobs there are and how few on paper capable people there are. So that requires you to think differently. What can we offer? What can we attract people against? And how can we bring what other organisations in the enterprise would look at as B players and make them A players? That's our responsibility, because it's the only way a company like ours will survive.
We've talked a lot about how we find the right talent, what are the skills and the mindsets, the things that talent needs to have, and a little bit about the process of bringing them in. From the candidate's perspective, what do you think they're looking for?
I think most people these days are looking for genuinely meaningful work. You know, can it connect to my sense of purpose for my life? And I think people are a lot more self-aware of that. And it's definitely something we try to screen for. Do you know what you want out of life? And quite often, especially with the younger resource, probably not. You know, I see people that are very good in the first 2 years of their job and then they tail off. And I think we've all seen that. It's been a very consistent theme of early entrance into a sales career. But if you probe around that, most of them will have fulfilled their very short-term goals, and that will be enough for them. Really good example, I had an amazing girl when I worked at Frost & Sullivan. She was really competent, super smart, lucky to get her. She was an Oxbridge grad, and you know, we managed to acquire her, and she added so much value, but after 2 years, you could just see it all gone. And I met up with her about a year and a half ago for drinks, and I sort of, you know, I was really curious about why that happened, and she was like, yeah, but I achieved everything that I'd set out to achieve for myself in that window of time. You know, I'd saved up, I'd managed to sort of put a deposit down for a house.
Right.
I managed to buy the car that I wanted, and I managed to have some amazing experiences, but I didn't have any sort of aspiration beyond that. And if you actually look at what she's doing now, she's kind of like a food blogger and does pop-ups around Bristol for vegan sort of food events, right? So, you know, it just wasn't for her, but she was sensationally successful, and she had these very limited material goals that she was pursuing. So for us, it's, well, do you actually have a long-term view on what you want out of life? Because, you know, there's nothing better than a sales career or more meritocratic for wealth creation, I believe, than working in the right sales environment. But yeah, trying to get a handle on that and helping people pursue it's a massive responsibility of us.
Well, I think it touches also on the other part of our conversation, which is that retention piece. So, you know, if someone had intervened 18 months into the 2 years and began a conversation, would it be possible to see if there was another goal to be set that the organization could help her fulfill and keep that great talent in-house? What do you think are the keys of retaining talent?
I think it's acutely understanding if people's desire to change scope and role can be met, and being honest about that. If they can't and people go, well, that's nobody's fault.
Yeah.
I think the second thing is always give people wins early on. If you can give people wins early on, then their propensity to be loyal, to stick and to continue is far greater. So we've baked it into our onboarding processes, or whenever we do some consultancy work for other companies through Feeding Unicorns, or whether it's internally at Eva, our onboarding mission is to allow people to come into the company with an initiative that they've taken ownership of, that they can implement on day one. Just simple little things like pre-onboarding people from the moment that the offer letter gets out. You know, we'll send the offer letter out with like a proof of their business card so that we can make sure that their name and spelling is right, that their phone number. We've got a checklist of things that we expect them to do before they join. You know, one of those will be sort of a team dinner, it might be drinks, it might be, can you read these 4 books? Can we do a book review against those 4 books? Can you sort of do some of this work and commit to that before you join? And actually that gives you an amazing sort of leading indicator about their sort of commitment and drive and desire. Because we want people to start on day 1 feeling confident, comfortable and capable immediately. We don't want to have to transition them through that 3-month ramp-up period.
Yeah.
Because that's not fair to them, because it sets the wrong expectations. So,
it's lost productivity for everybody
it's
as well.
lost productivity, but more broadly than that, you just want people to feel confident and capable that you're giving them the right environment to work. And it's those little things that lead to retention. Retention for me, though, is important because of the cost associated. Like, it's a brutal cost if people churn your business all the time. You know, from 11 different dimensions, and I could go really deep on that. But, you know, if you've got somebody cycling out every 8 or 9 months, then you're A, doing something wrong, you're eroding your value as an employer in the market, and then thirdly, you're not actually creating this amazing opportunity for somebody to just be consistently good for a 2 to 3 year period. And, you know, we kind of want to over-index and out-index everybody else in the market that's churning people because of their performance criteria, not their capability criteria. So we want to build that.
So you said there's sort of 11 dimensions. I'm sure that's not the precise number, but there's going to be the obvious costs that we all think of. 1 is just financial, and 2 is productivity and time. But what are some of those dimensions and costs that we may not think of so commonly that we should really bear more in mind to make a better effort to retain people?
So this is something we're hypersensitive about at the moment as a company because we're such a small organisation. It's reputation. Right? If you don't hire the right person who can carry the right conversation with conviction and execute the playbook ruthlessly well, then any moment that they dip in quality, you accrue reputational risk. Every deal matters so much at our stage of growth. So, you know, it's big enterprise kit, it's change management, it's people investing significant amount in trust into an unproven quantity, right? So you need the right sort of DNA to be able to ensure that your reputation stays solid through that process. I think the second element for me is very much driven by whether or not somebody is consistently showing the right appetite to add value to the organisation. You know, we talked just before we sort of came on camera about dickhead rock stars who don't conform to the behaviours and expectations of the company. They're going to be good for a moment in time, probably 13 to 14 months, and they'll give you some runway, and they might acquire you 50 enterprise logos that you never had before. But the churn cost out of bad deals executed because they didn't operate and behave in the right way is going to ultimately potentially unpick your business. So, you know, that short-term gain often isn't worth it. You know? I've speak to peers at other major sort of software companies that had their sort of land and expand teams in the UK who were just sort of cowboys buccaneering around the place, and 3 years later the sort of grown-ups who are now in the business are having to sort of go back and backfill the mistakes that were made. And you know, luckily for them, they IPO'd, so they've got a war chest. But for a company like us, where we're raising a Series A, it's a fundamentally different series of importance for us.
So you have obviously a bright future as a business, and you're going to scale well, I'm certain. The onboarding you mentioned sounded amazing, and I know I'm really passionate about how we onboard people. I think it's something that we don't take seriously enough, particularly when someone is chosen to typically leave a job and come and join our business. We need to do our fair due to bring them on board. Is what you described something that can scale? So when your organization is 10 times its current size, do you think companies can keep up that level of hand-holding and care? Quite practically, because I think we need to do a better job, but how do we do it?
I mean, technology can be a great value driver for something like this. Obviously, you can codify your curriculum into a platform like Illumi, right? It's a Danish startup that does this very work, and you can drive all of your certification out of that. Right, so that's an easy scale play, but maintaining the culture and the values and that human-to-human piece. When, you know, this time next year we aspire to have like 8 sales directors with teams of 4 behind them. And, you know, and how do I maintain my visibility and personal touch through that process? I don't know how to answer that right now. But it does go missing in a lot of instances.
It's a good challenge to have.
I hope if we achieve everything we set out to, we should get there. But, you know, I think you're right, and it's one of the most sort of valuable things. But I think it's one of the things that would be treated as non-important in that let's spend all the money drive that a lot of software companies have. So, you know, I've got to make a personal commitment to either want to lead it or pursue a different goal, right? And you know, that comes from your sort of acute leadership challenges.
Yeah.
that you end up having to confront on a daily basis.
Well, it's been such a good conversation
Thank you very
around
much.
talent and recruitment. You've brought a lot of insight to the conversation. Thank you so much. If you had just a nugget or two to leave the audience with about the things that you think are most important when we think about that talent retention, what would those last few words be?
Think really thoughtfully about the role that you're actually hiring for. Don't make it generic. Connect your coaching, onboarding processes to your recruitment narrative. And then lastly, work really hard on understanding why retention is more important than performance.
Perfect. All right. Thank you,
Thank
Gerry.
you very much.